Today we'll dive back into the somewhat murky waters of LJN licensed Nintendo games with a game based on a movie that is simultaneously one of the greatest summer blockbusters of all time and also one of the greatest creature features ever. Well, kinda. And I only say kinda because while I'm guessing a lot of people assume the game from 1987 is based on the Spielberg 75 classic, it's actually based on the fourth movie, the one that bought Michael Caine a house. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Jaws is the 1975 masterpiece directed by Steven Spielberg and adapted from his own book by Peter Benchley. Benchley wrote Jaws in 1974, and while it differs a bit from the movie, it follows the main points pretty well. Benchley sold the rights for $150,000 and was paid an additional $25,000 to write the screenplay. The movie was a hit, to put it lightly. It has made over $470 million through all of its theatrical releases and was, for a time, the most successful US release film of all time.
Smile, you son of a...
When award season came around, it was nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, and took home Best Sound, Editing, and Best Music. This would guarantee the franchise would continue. Like most big-name franchises, Jaws would follow the laws of diminishing returns, with Jaws 2 being the best, Jaws 3D being of the time that 3D was back in vogue, and ended up being silly but fun, and really dumb, and Jaws the Revenge is easily the worst. Jaws the Revenge isn't even talking about the family seeking revenge on any sharks, it's about the damn shark lineage seeking revenge on the Brody family. In addition to movies, Jaws would get all the accompanying merchandise like toys, books, comics, and video games. While there would be attempts at getting Jaws games off the ground, the first successful one would be today's pick, Jaws for the NES.
I'd like to thank you guys for watching Playing with Fear, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
Jaws was published by LJN in 1987, but like everything else, was developed by another company. This time it was again Atlas, who here actually subcontracted the development to Westone Bit Entertainment. That's 3 companies involved in what is essentially a 30-minute game, but 1987 games were certainly built different. LJN has received quite a bit of play in our channel, and while they absolutely published some real dreck over the 8 and 16-bit generations, I actually like quite a few of them, even outside of our 2 previously discussed slasher entries. Atlas even got in on the action earlier as they were the ones that developed Friday the 13th for LJN just a couple years after this. As discussed in that video, they are most famously known for the lengthy Shin Megami Tensei series of games. 1987 though was just too busy for them on the NES, with also having to make the Karate Kid video game tie-in and the Famicom-only release of Digital Devil's Story. Gee, I wonder why that didn't make it past Nintendo of America. Instead of doing a rush job on a 3rd game for 1987, they threw the creation duties of Jaws to Westone Entertainment. Westone probably doesn't ring a bell for most, but they have a pretty big IP under their belt. Wonder Boy was released in 1986 and was a huge sensation. It was released in the arcades, but also later for Sega's early consoles SG-1000, Master System, and even their ill-fated handheld, the Game Gear. While they would release games for the better part of 2 decades, the Wonder Boy franchise would be their most popular and the well in which they would find continued success. Jaws would be released in November of 1987 to mixed reviews, but pretty decent sales. The story here doesn't actually follow the all-time classic film. It doesn't actually follow the 4th film really either, but anyway, as I stated earlier, it gains its inspiration from that film. The box art takes its shark picture directly from the movie poster, and certainly the final act, which we'll get to, mirrors the film, but other than that, well, I'll just read it straight from the manual. This can't be! There has never been a great white in these warm tropical waters before. Never. This is more than a coincidence. This shark appears to be possessed, as if it's hunting you down, like it's personal. You better prepare yourself and strike back before it's too late. Will you use the mini-sub, the seaplane, sailboat, or just scuba gear? Perhaps it won't even matter. Remember, this is some kind of unbelievably powerful eating machine you're dealing with. Quick, grab your weapons, pack your explosives, and check your maps. It's out there. You know it. And it's coming for you. This is serious. This is the ultimate Jaws challenge, because this time it's not over until only one of you is left alive. Jaws is a strange mix of things gameplay-wise. It has a minor leveling up system like an RPG, a strange side-scrolling shooter feel on the meat of it, and even an arcadey bonus game that you can use to help or just get points. The game is broken down into a few different screens or sections. From the opening screen, you hit start and are shown your sailboat with all of the accompanying score tallies. The important ones are on the bottom. Jaws' power is his life bar, and the shells are your currency to upgrade your own power. The main idea of the game is to travel between ports and upgrade your power. You do this by running into a fight scene while on the main map. The screen shifts from an overhead view to the boat to a single screen of the player as the diver with jellyfish, stingray, and eventually sharks coming at you. You shoot them with the spear gun and hope they drop a seashell. While stars can also drop, they only add to your overall score rather than help you upgrade the spear gun's power. Every now and then you'll run into a bonus game. Within this game, the player stays in a plane and bombs groups of jellyfish as the plane flies from side to side. You can't get hurt here, and the more jellyfish you destroy, the more shells you get. The more shells you get, the quicker you can turn Jaws into a large-scale seafood buffet. These bonus screens are helpful, but they aren't the meat and potatoes of gameplay. That is reserved for the main trips into the ocean. Though you would expect these to get stale, and they do, the game at least tries to vary these screens with the movement speeds of the sea creatures trying to get you, as well as adding new ones like smaller sharks, and even varying the sea level depending on how close you are to the port. The lower the water level, the more difficult it is to maneuver around. You go from port to port, bringing these seemingly useless shells and using them as currency to upgrade your power. You also must purchase a receiver that helps you find the titular beast. As you go from port to port and from scene to scene collecting shells and upgrading your power, you can choose a couple of other options as well. There's a submarine that will give you an extra hit when you're underwater, and you can also seek out Jaws and have a battle with him. I wouldn't recommend this with a power level lower than 4, but you can chip away very slowly at his health by doing this. The longer you take to do this though, the more opportunity he will have to regain some of his health. When you're ready to take him on, be careful. If you die, not only will he get his health back, but your own power level and number of shells will reduce as well. When you fight Jaws, it also won't be only him in the area. All the other enemies you run across will be able to take part as well. After you take his power down to 0, you will be instantly transported to the final fight of the game. It changes gameplay styles again and almost becomes a first-person shooter, where you see the front of the boat and are tasked with dropping one of the 3 strobes to force Jaws out of the water, and hopefully onto the front of your boat while he'll be punctured and killed. Use up all 3 of your strobes without getting him, however, and it's back to the seas with you, and you have to have the side-scrolling fight all over again. Make sure you time it right so you can tell the sharks, "Smile, you son of a..." And then the game ends with Jaws sinking to the bottom of the ocean and you fleeing the tropical vacation via airplane. Is Jaws scary? No. But like we've mentioned in previous titles, a horror experience, certainly in video game form, doesn't need to be scary to be enjoyed. The title screen does a nice rendition of the Oscar-winning score. And sure, when you see the fin pop up in the ocean, especially if you aren't ready to take the fiend on, a certain sense of anxiety can pop up, but there really is an example of terror felt in the entire experience. The only other horror I can think of is that which is experienced if you happen to die and lose a lot of progress, or fail in the final screen and have to repeat the previous battle. Truly frightening. LJN, your reputation here again is another case of bark versus bite. Is this game the greatest thing that hit the NES? Well, no, of course not. But is it the bottom-feeding parasite that LJN games, especially of this era, tend to get credited for? Far from it. I'd say it's better and much quicker experience than the movie it's based on. Again, remember, it's based on the 3rd sequel, not the original, so don't hate me. With some practice, you can get good at it, and I can see the appeal for Jaws fans or NES aficionados looking to find a cheap, fun time to be had. Usually when we discuss our games here, we talk about all the ones that came before it that led to the culmination of the video's subject. With this game, however, and believe me, the history here is a bit muddled, this was actually the alpha, the first experience. While the movie franchise would die with Jaws the Revenge, the video games would build a legacy that would outnumber that of the original films. 1989 would give us Jaws the computer game for the Amiga, Amstrad CPC, Atari ST, C64, MSX, and ZX Spectrum. With this many different systems, you wound up with a game with the same name that ended up giving the users different experiences based on the machine they had. It's much more involved than the NES game, and depending on the system, looked and sounded better too. A different text-based adventure game would also come out in 1989 simply called Jaws, and would land both on the Apple II and DOS platforms. Completely different experience from both the 1987 and other 1989 outputs, though I'd say this would be my last choice for 80s Jaws video game experiences. The franchise would go dormant like the movies until a brief segment of the GameCube game Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure in 2001, in which you try to stop Jaws from scuttling your boat. 5 years later would give us Jaws Unleashed, which was unleashed on the PC, PS2, and original Xbox. This game really deserves and will probably get a video of its own, but for now just know that you get to play as Jaws in this one, and it's exactly as fun and bonkers as you'd imagine. Jaws: Ultimate Predator would be released for the Wii and DS in 2011, and would of course give you two fairly different experiences. Both games, though, let the player control Jaws again, albeit with less of an emphasis on wanton destruction. Between this and the Gremlins games, the Wii and DS were just full of games that you wouldn't have guessed were real. Other than a couple of mobile games here and there, the last Jaws-related release would be in 2017 with a board edition to the wildly successful and lovingly created Pinball FX3 on the Switch, PC, PS4, and Xbox One. While there aren't any new Jaws films on the horizon, and hopefully a remake will never happen, video games are another story. We could get a remaster or remake of Unleashed, or more spiritual successors like the wonderfully bonkers Maneater that came out recently. Which of these games have you played, and what was your favorite? Do you want to see another Jaws game? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you on the next episode of Playing with Fear.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Steven Spielberg's Jaws from 1975 is one of the quintessential, no pun intended, summer blockbusters ever, and one of the most well-regarded horror films of all time. While the novel that the film is based on by Peter Benchley spent 44 weeks on the bestseller list, the film is certainly more well-known now and ends up on countless top 10 lists. Jaws is undeniably a classic, but how close does it follow its own novel? Hop in the shark cage with us as we find out what the f*** really happened to this horror movie. First and foremost, Jaws isn't based on a true story, the book or the movie. Peter Benchley based his novel on a handful of things. First, there was the fact that he and his father Nathaniel used to go fishing in Nantucket quite often while he was growing up, and they would encounter sharks all the time. While interested in sharks most his life, Benchley would be inspired when reading about the story of fisherman Frank Mundus, who was able to catch a shark weighing over 4,500 pounds. While discussing possible book ideas with the editor of Doubleday, they both settled on the idea of a shark attacking a small resort town. Benchley had his assignment, and between his childhood experience, the tale of Frank Mundus, and the Jersey Shore shark attacks of 1916, he had his basic outline. The two main comparisons to look at when discussing books versus their film counterparts are the characters and the plot. The main protagonist in both mediums is Police Chief Martin Brody, who in the film is played by Roy Scheider. He is a loving and involved father and husband, and is shown to be compassionate to anyone and everyone, particularly during the frightening time of the shark attacks. While he knows it's his duty to go into the ocean and try to stop the great white, he is definitely scared and understanding he is out of his element. While the overall meat and potatoes of Sheriff Martin Brody are the same from book to film, book Brody has a few differences. First, he is described as a tough ex-cop who grew up on the Lower East Side of New York City and joined the force at just 18 years old. This sets up a stereotypical tough guy machismo persona and would have made sense to go with the original casting choice of Charlton Heston, who doesn't have quite the same charisma as Roy Scheider. Book Brody is also somewhat morally nebulous and even prone to violence when getting into it with other characters. While the three men in the boat on the film are far from best friends, they seem to bond over the experience, while Book Brody even attempts to choke Hooper at one point. Movie Brody is the lighter, more likable version of his literary counterpart. Matt Hooper is played by Richard Dreyfuss in the film after a recommendation by Spielberg friend and collaborator George Lucas when he heard that the character had not been cast with just over a week left before shooting began. Hooper in the film is a consulting oceanographer brought in to verify the shark attack on the first victim, Chrissy, when the mayor attempts to say it was caused by a boating accident. Hooper is a genial and sarcastic character that has no prior history with the town or its characters, and while he's out of his element hunting a great white shark, he bonds with the other two men on the boat and proves his worth out on the open sea when things get rough. Book Hooper is even more different to his film counterpart than that of his shark hunting cohort Brody. Hooper in the novel is the younger sibling to a man that dated Sheriff Brody's wife before she was married. He's an ichthyologist who is instead recruited by newspaper editor Harry Meadows when he seeks advice on how to deal with the shark. Hooper and Quint actively hate each other for being from different worlds, and Hooper is mortified by Quint's use of a baby dolphin and the gutting of a blue shark to lure their prey out of the depths. Finally, while the setup for the final encounter with the shark are the same in both mediums, Hooper's fate differs wildly from book to film, but more on that later. The singularly named Quint, portrayed famously by legendary tough guy Robert Shaw, was first offered to Sterling Hayden and Lee Marvin. While Marvin and Hayden would have certainly added their own dimensions to the character, Shaw often steals the scenes he's in and has some of the best dialogue in the entire film. Movie Quint is introduced pretty early on when he offers to catch the shark for a fee of $10,000. Quint starts off very solitary and one-track minded, but over the course of the movie ends up bonding and working well with both Hooper and Brody. During one of the nights on the boat, Hooper and Quint get drunk and start to show off how they got their scars before Quint tells his harrowing story aboard the USS Indianapolis. When the shark breaks through the hull and the men work to repair the ship, Quint has now taken it personally and smashes the radio to stop Brody from calling in help. With the boat nearly destroyed completely, Quint is eaten when the shark jumps up onto the boat. Of the three main characters, Quint is the one that differs most from book to screen. Not only is book Quint not in most of the story compared to Robert Shaw's screen time, but he also has none of the personality. The book version is a stand-in for Captain Ahab with his ruthless devotion to killing the shark. He doesn't even care when Brody tells him there's no more money in it for him. Book Quint also has half the dialogue of his film version. While he is salty to his fellow shipmates, possibly coming out more on screen due to the clashing of the actors portraying the characters actually not liking each other at times, he has none of the fun lines. There's no comparing of scars, no singing shanties while drunk, and certainly no opening up to the other two about his harrowing experience with sharks on the USS Indianapolis. The last big change comes at the end with his death, as it's changed from a rather quiet scene of being dragged into the ocean to an all-out brawl where he attempts to stab the shark from inside its mouth and kill it while being eaten alive. Additionally, the other minor characters have varying degrees of change. Mayor of Amity Island Larry Vaughn, played here by character actor Murray Hamilton, is a bit of a snake oil salesman who understands that the whole of Amity's revenue comes from it being a beach resort town. He tries to dissuade Sheriff Brody from closing the beaches down, and even tries to change the narrative to the fact that people aren't being eaten by a shark, instead succumbing to horrible boating accidents. It's only after another shark attack on the 4th of July that the mayor finally relents to having the beaches closed, and having men go after the shark. Book Mayor is just as slimy, but he has ulterior motives for wanting to keep the beaches open and the revenue flowing. He's also easily manipulated by the editor of the newspaper, Harry Meadows, who is a main character in the book and is only seen in one short sequence in the film played by the other screenwriter, Carl Gottlieb. He also decides to leave town near the end of the novel and tells Brody's wife Ellen that they would have made a good couple, a scene completely missing from the film. Speaking of Ellen Brody, played here by Lorraine Gary, her character is a loving wife and mother who is supportive of both her husband and her children. She mostly stays on the sidelines for the movie, apart from the Hitchcock-inspired 4th of July sequence, and a scene with Hooper visiting the Brodys for dinner. Gary was actually kind of upset after the script was changed, as she knew who her character was in the book, and also knew that meant not having much of a character arc or impactful scenes. Book Ellen is a much more complex character, with subplots of her own. She questions the excitement of her life with Brody, and even begins an illicit affair with one of the other main characters before having the realization that her life really hasn't been that bad. The characters are all here, with varying degrees of book accuracy, but how is the plot? Does the story follow beat for beat what is written on the page? Spielberg's Jaws opens with a skinny dipper being attacked with a now famous POV shot having the audience be complicit in the shark's attack, while also showing how powerful and menacing it can be. Brody wants the beaches closed, but the mayor is able to convince him that it was a boating accident and is backed up by the coroner. The sheriff accepts this until a young boy is killed, and it's quite clear Shark is the culprit. Both the film and the book open in nearly identical ways, with the same skinny dipper named Chrissy being eaten, and the mayor trying to cover it up and change the sheriff's mind. The book differs slightly, with editor Harry Meadows playing a much larger part in both the decision and the book as a whole. Alex Kinter is the name of the boy in both mediums that meets the same fate shortly after, but in the book an elderly man also gets eaten in the same scene. The movie then opens a bounty on the shark, while Matt Hooper is brought in to confirm that Chrissy was also eaten by a shark to give Brody the reasons he needs to close the beach. Quint offers his help for $10,000 in one of the most famous scenes in the film. This section of the book is significantly different. Ben Gardner is hired to track and kill the shark, but goes missing before his boat returns abandoned and with a large shark bite. Brody asks the mayor to close the beaches again, but again is told no. Newspaper editor Harry Meadows looks into possible reasons why the mayor would be so bullish on keeping the beaches open, only to find out that he has mafia ties and needs to keep the real estate value higher as the mob has invested significant funds in the town. It is only here that Hooper is asked to come consult, and it's done by Meadows. The entire subplot, including the bulk of Meadows' character, is completely missing from the film adaptation. The film continues with Hooper and Brody investigating the attacks when some fishermen catch a rather large tiger shark. Neither men believe the shark to be the culprit, and no human remains are found within it. The pair find a damaged ship on the water with a massive shark tooth and the head of fisherman Ben Gardner before begging the mayor to close the beaches. He refuses again until another shark attack happens on the 4th of July, and he finally relents, closing the beaches and hiring Quint. The book also has the attack that causes the beaches to be closed, but it's Brody who forcefully closes them and hires Quint, who had not been mentioned before in the book up to this point. It's also during this later time frame that Hooper is introduced. Ellen Brody has an affair with him as she has become bored with her life and looks to rekindle some of the fire she had with Hooper's older brother some years before she married Martin. The movie then moves to the three men's adventure on the boat hunting the shark. While they don't get along great at first, they slowly build a bond, and after seeing the size of the shark and Quint successfully harpooning it to track it, they get drunk and exchange stories before Quint gives his legendary speech about his survival.
The men of the book also set out to sea, but absolutely hate each other. Quint and Hooper are always at odds with who they are on every level, while Brody and Hooper have a tension due to the affair, which eventually leads to Brody nearly strangling Hooper to death. While the companions of the movie stay on the water day and night, the book trio actually come home after every uneventful day. The mayor also visits the Brody house to tell them that he and his wife are leaving, while also telling Ellen that they would have been a great couple. Another subplot that is wiped clean for the adaptation. The shark attacks the boat at night during the film, and the three heroes scramble to fix the damage. In a fit of obsessed rage, Quint destroys the radio that prevents them from calling for help, and the shark destroys much of the rest of the boat after Quint nails it with another harpoon. With few options, Hooper volunteers to go into a shark cage and attempt to jab the beast with strychnine, but is quickly disarmed when the cage is destroyed. He flees to the ocean floor, and the shark jumps onto the boat where it kills Quint. Thinking fast, Brody gets a scuba tank into the monster's mouth before uttering one of the film's best lines and blowing the shark to bits with Quint's rifle before reuniting with Hooper and swimming back home. The book's ending sequence is about as different as you could get from the film. Hooper decides to use a shark cage and a bang stick this time to stop the shark, and initially Quint refuses. The boat is in good shape here rather than sinking, and they aren't quite out of options. Hooper pays Quint $100, and when he goes into the cage, it's destroyed like the film, but there is no escape for Hooper here as he is violently dispatched. The two remaining men go home for the night before coming back out to sea for one more day. The final day sees the shark aggressively attacking the boat, and after Quint connects with multiple harpoons, the shark breaks up much of the boat and drags Quint to a much sadder and less exciting death by drowning. Brody fully expects to be next, but as the shark gets right up to him, it simply dies from blood loss, sinking to the bottom of the sea with Quint still attached to its body. Brody watches this in stunned silence before paddling his way home. Even with author Peter Benchley writing a draft of the script, the film and book version of Jaws start out similar but end up being incredibly different. The book has unlikable characters and a ton of subplots dealing with cheating spouses and government leaders in the mob's pockets. Spielberg decided to eschew these sections in favor of a more straightforward summer blockbuster, and if ticket sales and fan admiration are any indication, he made the right call.
Some movies just work better in a matching climate. Like The Thing, it just hits different in the heart of January, as opposed to August. If you prefer to watch Captain Ron in November, you just hate happiness. And let's be honest, Jaws peaks in July. And maybe it's the summer setting, or when school's out they do these marathons of the series as a kid. But we are currently in Jaws season. And its first sequel, surprisingly enough, is far better than it has any right to be. Somewhat similar to, I'd say, Psycho 2 or even The Fly 2, where the mere existence of a part 2, a sequel, just seems like a bad omen. But somehow Jaws 2 did not the bed. So today let's break down why, flaws and all, it holds up as a great B-movie sequel, and discuss the scene that defines it. I'm Lance Velchek, and this is Scene Breakdown. Jaws, and all of its production issues / delays that pushed the film's original December opening into the summer, ended up creating this summer blockbuster. It's a masterpiece, and rightfully so. The directing is perfect, with a young Spielberg having an innate talent of blocking and framing, Oscar-worthy performances, and real, tangible tension, wrapped up in one of the best scores of all time, courtesy of John Williams. Add onto this the technical difficulties that forced the shark to be implied far more than it was shown, and you have filmmaking history. Now, how the do you follow up that? How does one even make a sequel to Jaws?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Here's a little condensed version of its history. Howard Sackler, who was an uncredited writer on the original and co-writer on part 2, who actually came up with Quint's famous monologue, pitched Universal on a prequel instead of a sequel, which of course they passed on. In fact, part 2 had a messy production. John D. Hancock was the original director, filming for over a month at least before being let go. Universal wasn't happy with his darker tone, and the dailies did not impress him. Similar to Piranha 2 with James Cameron, he was promptly fired and replaced by a more seasoned director. Jonas Schwartz came aboard, along with Jaws writer Carl Gottlieb, for a rewrite to lighten things up. And then Jaws 2 became what it is today. And I've always said that there is a certain B-movie charm to this sequel. And it's what Jaws would have been if not for, well, divine movie intervention. I mean, this sequel is such a wild beast to look back on. Part fun monster and slasher movie, upping the shark tax, picking off teens, and dying in a grand over-the-top death. Yet it still tries to be a drama, with Brody angrier at life and fearful of his son's safety. It's both schlocky and poignant. It's bizarre and, strangely enough, why this movie is respected more than you'd expect. It's because they kind of pull it off. Listen, of course, there are pacing issues, cardboard cutout characters, and some unintentionally hilarious parts. But it holds its own far better than it should, and has more than a few iconic moments. But before I dive into what I feel is the defining scene, I think it's appropriate to dig into some of the runner-ups, as a couple of these could have easily made the pick.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
For starters, the boat ambush. On a technical level, it's tight, with great movement, chaotic yet sensible. You don't really give a shit about these characters, but you do feel the stress. The sharks zipping around, everything is madness. And of course, pulling Michael up in the nick of time, giving us this quintessential shot. I don't care if you could see the mechanics of the shark, this is great. Of course, I can't leave out my helicopter guy with a fantastic Omnish beard. Poor guy's just trying to make it through the day. It's a great set piece, with this snapping helicopter blades destroying the remaining boat's sails, a nice touch to kill any remainder of hope. And then there's the ending. Is it dumb? Absolutely, but that's why it's so iconic. I mean, Universal Studios, and to be honest, I only acknowledge Orlando, had the cable bite as its finale. It's creative and absurd. It's a level of over the top that probably fits more in line with Jaws 3 or 4. But because of the directing from Jonas Schwartz and a pissed off Roy Scheider, the shark jumping into its own demise is dumb fun that somehow feels right. Also, real quick, contractual obligations be damned, even though Scheider hated this fucking movie, he absolutely shows up to work and owns it. I mean, that town hall meeting...
And you better do something about this one, because I don't intend to go through that hell again!
Or even him freaking out emptying his gun into the water. It's just great. There was a certain level of class and acting that we just do not have today. Because this has that classy and cinematic 70s style, mixed with its B-movie plot, Jaws 2 just has this strange vibe to it. But to me, all of this, what makes Jaws 2, is one scene in particular. Set against the beautiful and beachy backdrop of Amity Island, the scene starts with some innocent fun, the kind of thing you'd try and do drunk on vacation, with Terry enjoying life. Cinematographer Michael Butler paints a carefree day with filmic sea blue shimmering water, clear skies, and we get the stalk. The director holds back enough to build some genuine tension, POV following shots, a well-placed fin, the monster. And yes, the shark is a stand-in for a monster. It always has been. More so here. Is lurking just beneath the surface. We get footage of a real shark going for the kill. And of course, now it's driver Diane's turn. You see, Terry's kill is more in line with the style of the original. It's the calm before the storm. And one, this employs with precision. The setup and focus is on the chase. But Diane's kill is the B-movie bridge that gives Jaws 2 its identity. The shark goes full attack mode, ramming the boat, like a great theme park ride. Just this moment is nothing like what we've seen before. The way it's shot and blocked is the switch to the style of the sequel. Even when showing the shark, Spielberg had a method where he would cut with purpose, scare through the edit. But this ramming scene is pure popcorn fun. It's frantic in a very purposeful manner. I mean, the shark has a clear grasp of the task at hand. It's acting in a more intelligent way. We've dropped the charade of the shark to give us the creature it always was meant to be. This is great. why even try to drive the boat to shore, which is suspiciously close? See, here Diane just freaks out, decides that dousing a water-dwelling creature with gasoline to be the best option, and pretty much misses and covers herself. Panics a bit more, then shoots a flare in the boat. Not saying that this was a foolish move. Maybe her pain tolerance is stronger. Listen, I'm not here to judge folks, but
What the fuck?
does happen to blow her to bits, which may have been a bad move. It's outrageous and so schlocky that you can't help but love it. It even gives the shark a cool facial scar and a reason for revenge. And if you don't think this thing is more aggressive after that embarrassing slip-up, you don't know your monsters. It's so wild and ludicrous that it's the cover. It's a selling point of Jaws 2. This is a scene that defines it. It balances the more held-back suspense of the first and the teen slasher edition in one fun scene. And this mix makes for something tonally odd, yet endearing. This doesn't just thrill, it lingers in the mind. A testament to the enduring charm of Jaws 2.
Seems like the world is moving on. Didn't stop to look around. Didn't give a shit if you're crashing down. You can close your eyes but not your skin. Don't believe what you refuse to see. Won't find a way in. Well, I can't ignore a certain fate. The result of people fighting every day.
Shark still looks fake.
3D movies are awesome, right? Well, not necessarily, but they're part of a recurring fad in cinema that looks like it may have run its course. However, the view of this particular writer as an impressionable young kid in 1983 was that 3D movies were awesome. How was I privy to such knowledge though? As the only other 3D movies released anywhere close to that time period were certainly not suitable for this excitable pup. No, the buzz around the latest, most exciting movie to utilize the 3D format came from the epitome of all knowledge, the school playground. Friends and older siblings had raved about seeing Steven Spielberg's 1975 classic Jaws, and its fun but lesser sequel Jaws 2 in 1978. Having seen the trailer for Jaws 3 in a local theater, they claimed that it was actually in 3D. Furthermore, the movie was, in their words, amazing, and would change the way cinema would be made forever. Okay then, I'm not sure I can validate this, but there were tales of limbs and blood hurtling towards the screen, and it was going to be the most terrifying movie you had ever seen. Of course, that was playground talk, and sure, I still wasn't at an appropriate age when I eventually saw the movie, but I wanted to see it regardless. Just like Dr. Ian Malcolm said, life finds a way. And before I knew it, I was able to sneak past the ushers and had a ticket to see the film. What followed was a pinnacle moment in the movie-going life of this young film-obsessed rascal, and I sat there ready for what my schoolmates had promised was a blood-soaked 3D extravaganza, and boy were they wrong. The original movie is a bona fide classic that saw a young Spielberg at the very top of his game, so early in his directorial career, and while Jaws 2 doesn't live up to the first film, it still delivered enough scares and thrills to satiate fans. And it had just enough bite, you could say, and also brought back key members of the first film's cast to boot. However, it did manage to shoehorn some fairly ridiculous but fun action into the mix. 1975's Jaws was one of the first horror movies that I had the pleasure of seeing at a fairly young age. Again, due to the cunning on my part, and my parents having a bit of a liberal attitude to what their kids watched. Well, I mean, apart from the time that they banned me from going to see Rocky IV at my local cinema as it was apparently too violent. So you let me watch people being eaten by a huge great white shark, but not two buffed up dudes pretending to hit each other? That's parenting 101 right there, folks. Jaws 3 left a lasting impression on me, and not because it was a great movie. No, far from it. But it was one of those cinema-going experiences that stayed with me for more nostalgic reasons. Back then, theaters were jam-packed on opening weekend, and sometimes the weeks afterwards, especially for what were generally regarded as tentpole films back then. Jaws 3, with its, if you believe the playground rumors, amazing 3D effects, was one of those movies. All we had to go on was a grainy trailer and that aforementioned word of mouth, so anticipation was at a fever pitch going into the film. However, before we get into the gory details of Jaws 3D itself, it's worth revisiting the film's production, as it turned out to be just as tortured as getting a mechanical shark to behave for Spielberg and his crew on the first movie. The idea for the Shark threequel was originally pitched by the producers of the first two movies, David Brown and Richard Zanuck, as a spoof called Jaws 3 People Zero. However, there was just one snag in this cunning plan: Universal Pictures. The studio hated the idea of making the movie a spoof. Had they not seen Airplane?
I'll take care of this. Calm down. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Doctor, you're wanted on the phone.
Executive producer David Brown summed up Universal's attitude about making the movie a spoof as fouling in your own nest. We should have fouled the nest. It would have been golden, maybe even platinum. Again, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but would the movie have been any better if it had went down that particular route? Maybe, but we will never know, and the movie itself is almost like a Sharknado flick anyway, just without the knowing self-awareness. Ultimately, writer, producer, and director Alan Landsberg bought the rights to produce the film, and initially approached experimental filmmaker Murray Lerner, who already had experience in the 3D format with his 1978 film Sea Dream. However, once he saw the script, Lerner described how his heart sank at the prospect of becoming involved, and bailed just as quickly as he was first approached. In the end, first-time director Joe Alves agreed to helm the project, after working as production designer on the first two movies, and also as the second unit director on Jaws 2. However, despite the production having its main man in place behind the camera, the writing process was typically complicated for what Universal were hoping would be a successful continuation of one of their key movie franchises. Several writers were involved, including Richard Matheson, who had previously written the script for Spielberg's 1971 television movie, Duel, and who, in his own words, claims to have written a very interesting outline for the story, despite it ultimately being credited to someone else. One issue was that Universal were forcing Matheson to include Chief Brody's two sons in the narrative, which the writer thought was dumb, especially considering that the studio also wanted the shark in the movie to be the same one that was electrocuted in Jaws 2. As the following quote attests, the writer was less than impressed with the final cut of the film. "I'm a good storyteller, and I wrote a good outline and a good script, and if they had done it right, and if it had been directed by somebody who knew how to direct, I think it would have been an excellent movie. Jaws 3D was the only thing Joe Alves ever directed. The man is a very skilled production designer, but as a director, no. And the so-called 3D just made the film look murky. It had no effect whatsoever. It was a waste of time." In perhaps a surprising and arguably bold move, Jaws 3 did not bring back any of the cast from the first two films. So gone were the legendary Roy Scheider as well as his on-screen wife played by Lorraine Gary. In fact, Universal had no option to bring back Scheider to play Police Chief Martin Brody again, as the actor made it very clear that he would not be interested in the project, stating that Mephistopheles couldn't talk me into doing it. They knew better than to even ask. To be extra certain of having no involvement in the movie, Scheider agreed to do the 1983 movie Blue Thunder instead, which turned out to be a very smart move, as that movie is pretty decent. Well played, sir. Well played indeed. So with the mostly lack of legacy characters, the slate was clean for the writers and producers to introduce a new smorgasbord of shark bait for the threequel. The most high-profile casting was Dennis Quaid, who was cast to play Mike Brody, son of Chief Brody from the first two films. Joining Quaid was newcomer and future mother of Marty McFly, Leah Thompson. Then there was Bess Strong, Simon McCorkindale, and Louis Gossett Jr. The cast overall was quite strong, but the most interesting tale from the production was Dennis Quaid's admission in an interview with Esquire from 2015 that he was high on cocaine in every single frame of the movie. He claims that he was at the height of his drug use while filming this, and would apparently stage fights with crew members during production to freak out the rest of the cast. If approached regarding the movie nowadays, his response is, "I was in Jaws what?"
Gotcha!
We've established that Jaws 3 had quite the eventful inception, and that certain members of the cast may have been high on cocaine for the duration of the shoot. But what about the quality of the movie itself? Is it really as bad as quite a few people have said in the past? Or were my school friends correct in their hasty proclamations of it having the best 3D you have ever seen? The original movie is such an all-time classic that, after multiple rewatches, you can still find something new or hidden away to marvel at. No, unfortunately, the much maligned Jaws 3 is mildly entertaining, but largely toothless monster movie that acts more like an elongated advertisement for SeaWorld with some shoddy visual effects added in. Dennis Quaid's Mike Brody, son of Chief Brody from the first film, now working for SeaWorld alongside his brother Sean. Now, you perhaps would have thought that childhood trauma involving man-eating sea creatures would put a person off from working at a place such as SeaWorld, but we'll suspend our disbelief at this point. Anyway, SeaWorld is gearing up to open its brand new state-of-the-art undersea kingdom that has a series of gates that are accessible to the ocean. When one of the gates inevitably malfunctions, a cheeky young great white shark sneaks in and ultimately dies in the tank it's placed in. Then, despite great whites generally not giving a flying about their offspring the moment they are born, Mama Shark goes into full-on berserker mode, and all bets are off. The 3D elements of the movie are simply left as a series of lackluster scenes in 2D, with severed arms and other things poking towards the camera for no apparent reason. My hazy recollections of the 3D from that theatrical experience all those years ago did make me realize watching it again back in the early 80s that the 3D was probably fun, if albeit a throwaway aspect of the film. The opening shot, for example, where an unseen shark bites the head off a fish and then floats awkwardly in the frame for what feels like an eternity, it was probably quite cool and morbidly humorous in 3D. But the desperate lingering on the severed head is a clear sign of the lack of real quality behind the camera on this threequel. Even the cast can't quite save the movie. Dennis Quaid seems entirely disinterested in his role and allegedly high as a kite, while his love interest, played by Bess Armstrong, has no way of sparking any real chemistry with her co-star. Only the great, if strangely cast and underutilized, Lou Gossett Jr. attempts to fill scenes with the required gravitas and earned delivery required to carry a movie such as Jaws 3. Gossett Jr. had just won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for An Officer and a Gentleman before he took on the role as the mastermind behind the Watery Amusement Park. So it's a shame his role didn't have a more dramatic arc.
$2.5 million turbine that's not going to go up in smoke because of some damn fish. Now shut the pumps down.
Overall, the movie is ridiculous but fun. If you discount it as part of a potentially great franchise, with an amazing first movie and pretty decent second one. If only it had lived up to its marketing tagline, "The third dimension is terror." Despite Jaws 3 not exactly being the critical success that Universal may have been hoping for, it still managed to pull in a respectable total of $45 million worldwide, which was the highest for a 3D movie for some time in the 80s. This led to the inevitable continuation of the franchise, and before too long, audiences were treated to the unintentionally hilarious Jaws: The Revenge in 1987. Legendary English actor Michael Caine was somehow persuaded to join the cast of the fourth movie, and he at least plays his role with gusto throughout. Plus, we get ample use of John Williams' score in the movie to offset what is easily the worst entry in the franchise. It seems to have ended the series for good, and while you've got Jason Statham taking on gigantic sharks for a living nowadays, it looks like it'll stay that way. The most fun aspect of revisiting 80s horror memories for this series is the fact that we can look back on movies that helped to shape our love of the genre in some way, shape, or form. While Jaws 3 is in no way a good film, it represents a time in my life where going to the cinema was an incredibly exciting thing for me to do. And yes, those school friends whose youthful exuberance and liberty with the truth knew no bounds. The theatrical landscape has changed exponentially since the 1980s, and while going to the cinema continues to be a huge thrill, the way in which we consume media is evolving. 1982 saw the release of a hugely successful Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, which started the trend in the decade of resurrecting the format. Avatar aside, 3D movies nowadays are no longer much of a draw for audiences. With the rise of streaming services and consumer habits changing constantly, movies such as Jaws 3 have their own special place in time for people such as me who had a fun time with it as a youngster, and its legacy lives on in this regard.
Jaws pretty much invented the summer blockbuster and scared generations out of the water. The shark movie was born. With such a high bar set, it's been tough to come close, and every once in a long while, we get a good one. Open Water and The Reef come to mind. With the heartfelt, intense film The Shallows, and the nail-biting 47 Meters Down, we seem like we might be in a shark film revival. For too long has it been a running joke, putting sharks in snow, sand, and f***ing tornadoes? If you make a bad film intentionally, it's not so bad it's good. It's just bad. This is where the subgenre is gone. Jokey concepts with no budget. It's become a bad CGI parody of its former self. One could argue we never had enough good to combat the bad. But once in a while we get a bullseye. And it brings me back. As a young kid at the video store in the summer renting any shark film I could. Now a fading memory of a time long past. We need to go back.
We have to go back!
Back to the passion of the original Jaws. And that brings me to the argument at hand. Jaws had 4 films total, and I'm still waiting for part 5 with Quinn on the USS Indianapolis.
So 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945.
All these were, and still are, met with varying degrees of passion and hate. And as unfairly labeled as the black sheep is Jaws the Revenge. In fact, I'll do things a bit different this time. Let's start with the flaws. Pacing is slow, the practical effects are dated and a bit lazy, while the story is absolutely ridiculous. You see, all is right in the world. We can go on living. To say this movie is hated would be an understatement. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here and spend my time telling you it's an underrated masterpiece. This, it is not. Revenge was meant to reignite the camaraderie of the first film, and failed to do so, but it did try. The now widowed Ellen Brody takes the lead here, and can we give some credit that a major studio put a 50-year-old woman as the lead in a summer blockbuster? That's awesome. But the Chicagoan in me thinks it probably has more to do with her Universal chief executive husband / producer, pulling a Rod Blagojevich.
I mean, I've got this thing, and it's fucking golden. And I'm just not giving it up for fucking nothing.
But we still follow Ellen Brody pushed to the breaking point after her son Sean is murdered by a shark. Though poorly edited, we do get a pretty intense scene as Sean Brody begs for his life in the cold, dark water of the Upper East Coast while children practice Christmas carols in the background. This is the revenge. She is sick of sharks fucking with her family and knows now it's personal.
Come and get me, you son of a bitch.
She's actually right. This shark is coming for her and her family because the shark has become what it was all along, a movie monster. It plans, sets traps, and hunts like an intelligent organism. Jaws was never trying to be authentic with its shark. But now the gloves are off, and it embraces its sci-fi roots. The creature shares a telepathic link with our lead. It's so far out of the realm of possibility, it's perfect. They do go out of their way to show that this shark is far from normal, For one, it's battle-scarred and has a hell of a snarl. It has a semi-emotional face, a face for revenge. It also roars. Now, sharks don't have vocal cords, but it still roars because it's a shark in name only. In an early version of the script, and which made it into the novelization, is a disgruntled witch doctor who has a feud with the Brody family. It's the serpent and the rainbow of Jaws, or more accurately, Weekend at Bernie's 2 with a shark.
Get on up. Get on up. Get on up.
Now you may ask, who reads a novelization of Jaws 4? Me. I do. And it explains and gives merit, though ridiculous, to the more sci-fi-ish elements. They play it razor straight. And that sorta helps you accept the schlock. You see, they aimed high, unlike Jaws 3. We can all agree that there was a significant drop after part 2, but somehow all I've ever heard was
3 was bad, but Jaws the Revenge?
I can't grasp how Jaws 3 gets a cosmic pass on this. The plot sounds like a cool idea. A great white shark, 35 feet long, which is 10 feet longer than the original, hunting in an Orlando theme park. It's chaos. This giant shark probably looks awesome. Oh, it doesn't? And they never show the full shark until this. This somehow looks worse than this? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I'm sure they'll have some sort of classic cinematography and use the park to their advantage. Oh, it's shot mostly at night? It's SeaWorld, so there will probably be some cool fight with a dolphin or a killer whale. No? Jesus, what a colossal waste of a rich idea. Even Jason Takes Manhattan, which gave me almost no Manhattan, had the common courtesy to at least give me Jason on the high seas. Let's stop pretending like this was the lesser of two evils. Jaws 3 was a dull execution of a cool but wasted idea. The shark never looked worse, and even Iron Eagle himself looks bored. Everyone in Jaws the Revenge does a great job of selling the absurd. The amazingly named Lance Guest, who is great in Halloween 2 and The Last Starfighter, brings a sympathetic appeal here. Given the material, I'm impressed that he can seem so down to earth without coming off boring or stagnant. Lorraine Gary should get major props here. This story of a vengeful, telepathic, possessed shark is somehow grounded by her story of loss. It's B-movie sci-fi balanced with dramatic telling of grief and acceptance. I don't think she was, or is a strong enough actress to hold this film, but the role was written well, and she did a good enough job, which is why I lean towards my Blagojevich theory.
And it's fucking golden.
The best part of Jaws the Revenge is easily Michael Caine's Hoagie. Michael Caine was in a bit of a rut at the time, and took the job because of pay and location, which is perfect for us. His talent is so natural, he brings what is a small part and reshapes the movie around him. Every time he's on screen, he's cracking jokes and telling wild stories.
I was picked up by this tribe of headhunters, and they took me to see their tune. Come back at lunchtime, all the flies will be in the kitchen. I knew a one-armed piano player once. Took 2 minutes to play the minute waltz.
If you listen to what he says, it's bizarre. I assume the character was supposed to come off a lot weirder, but Caine is so damn likable, you believe every line he delivers.
What do you do when you're not flying people? I deliver laundry.
For a film that was long into its series, it still fails on most of its basic levels. This I know, but is it joyless? Does it not have a single redeeming quality? We get some laughable errors. An ending so unbelievable they reshot it and made it more unbelievable. Even after the upfront scars, I still hold this film dear to my heart. The banana boat kill is fun, while the Brody kill is remarkably dark. We get a cool shark chase through a sunken ship in an odd holiday setting. That charm was never lost on me, unlike the low-lit student film that graced our theaters with its gimmicky 3D and the lesser of the Quaids. Neither of these films can hold a candle to the original, and with a couple of really solid shark films coming out, I have hope that one day we might get closer to that, closer than we ever have before. I hope. But do me a small favor. The next time Jaws the Revenge is on cable, let it play. Try and watch it from a different perspective. Try to find the heart, buried deep in a mess of a film. And if all else fails, you will always have Michael Caine.